If this video found you, pause for a moment, because this is not random. Out of billions of signals, timelines, and possibilities, this message crossed your awareness at the exact moment it needed to. You may already feel it, a quiet pressure behind your thoughts, a sense that something familiar is dissolving, that the old version of you can't fully return. That's not confusion. That's recognition. You weren't searching for this video, it located you, and that's how quantum shifts begin, not with noise, but with resonance. You're here because something in you is waking up before a quantum shift. Nothing shatters all at once. There is no dramatic collapse, no single moment where you can point and say, that's when everything changed. Instead, it begins quietly, almost politely, as a feeling that your life no longer fits you the way it once did. You wake up and move through the same routines, but something inside you stays slightly behind, like a soul that hasn't fully stepped into the day. You may still function well, even succeed, yet there's a low, persistent sense that you're wearing a version of yourself that has grown tight at the seams. You might notice that the things you once chased no longer pull at you with the same force. Goals that used to feel urgent now feel distant, like echoes of a different lifetime. It's not that you've become ungrateful or lazy, it's that the energy that once animated those desires has quietly withdrawn. Your consciousness has started to disengage from a timeline it has already completed, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. This creates a strange paradox where nothing is technically wrong, yet nothing feels fully right. Conversations can start to feel hollow, even with people you care about. You listen, you respond, but there's a sense that you're observing the exchange rather than inhabiting it. You may find yourself craving depth without knowing exactly what that depth is. Superficial answers feel exhausting. Noise feels heavier. Silence starts to feel more honest. This isn't isolation, it's refinement. Your awareness is recalibrating, and it's becoming less tolerant of what no longer resonates. At times, this phase can feel like boredom, or restlessness, or a quiet grief without an obvious cause. You might question yourself, wondering if you've lost motivation, passion, or direction. But what's actually happening is subtler and far more significant. You are no longer being fed by the identity that once sustained you. The version of you that learned how to survive, how to strive, how to belong, its job is finishing. And when an identity completes its purpose, it doesn't announce its departure. It simply stops generating meaning. This is where many people panic. They try to force enthusiasm back into old dreams, revive outdated goals, or distract themselves with new stimulation. But the discomfort persists because it's not a problem to be solved. It's a signal to be listened to. You are not meant to repair this feeling. You are meant to pass through it. The unease is the doorway. What makes this stage so confusing is that it arrives without instructions. No one tells you that outgrowing a life can feel like losing interest in it. No one explains that misalignment often masquerades as apathy. But this is the earliest whisper of a quantum shift, the moment when your inner frequency changes before the outer world has had time to respond. You are ahead of your circumstances, and that gap can feel lonely if you don't understand what it is. Yet, this feeling is not emptiness. It is space. Space is required for something new to arrive. If your life still fit perfectly, there would be no room for expansion. If the old desires still burned brightly, there would be no reason for your awareness to search beyond them. The quiet dissatisfaction you feel is not pulling you downward. It's loosening your attachment to what you are no longer meant to carry forward. And here is the most important truth in this moment. Nothing has gone wrong. You are not broken, behind, or failing some invisible test. You are responding instinctively and accurately to a shift that has already begun within you. The fact that your old life feels slightly out of phase is not a flaw. It's proof that your consciousness is moving first. The world will follow. It always does. As that inner loosening begins, something else quietly comes into focus. A sense that time itself feels different now. Not faster exactly, but denser, as if each moment carries more consequence than it used to. This is where 2026 enters the field, not as a date on a calendar, but as a threshold your awareness has already started to approach. Some years behave like corridors, others like walls, but a few act like doorways. You can feel them long before you reach them because they begin reorganizing you in advance. 2026 is one of those years. It doesn't wait for January to announce itself, it arrives as a pressure in your perception, a quiet insistence that something is preparing to cross over. What makes a year a threshold is not what happens externally, but how little room it leaves for unconsciousness. As this gateway approaches, patterns that once lingered now collapse quickly. Delays shorten. Avoidance becomes uncomfortable. Choices echo louder. You may notice that the margin for living on autopilot has thinned. When you act out of alignment, the feedback is almost immediate, not as punishment, but as correction. Reality becomes more responsive, more precise, as if it's listening more closely than before. This is why so many people feel a subtle urgency without a clear reason. It's not anxiety about the future, it's an instinctive awareness that the field is becoming more sensitive. In a threshold year, intention weighs more than effort. Who you are being matters more than what you are doing. The old strategies of forcing outcomes or pushing through resistance begin to fail, not because they're wrong, but because they belong to a heavier, slower timeline. 2026 operates on coherence. It responds to internal clarity, not external struggle. You may already be sensing this shift in how manifestation works for you. Things either move with surprising ease or stall completely. There is less middle ground. What aligns flows, what doesn't dissolves. This can feel unsettling if you're used to gradual change, but it's also a gift. Thresholds remove ambiguity. They make truth obvious. They strip away the illusion that you can carry everything with you into what comes next. This is where the paradox deepens. 2026 is both an ending and a beginning, but it doesn't announce itself as either. It simply raises the standard of resonance. Identities that were built on reaction, obligation, or survival find less support. Roles you stepped into to be needed or accepted start to feel heavy. At the same time, aspects of you that were once quiet, intuition, discernment, a sense of inner authority, begin to feel stronger and more trustworthy. You are not being asked to become someone new. You are being asked to stop dimming what is already emerging. Threshold years don't demand transformation through force. They invite initiation through choice. Every decision becomes a small alignment ceremony, a subtle vote for the timeline you are stepping into. This is why procrastination can feel more painful now, and clarity more relieving. You are no longer buffered by time. The space between intention and experience is narrowing, and that can only happen when consciousness is ready to take responsibility for its creative power. If this sounds intense, that's because it is, but not in the way fear imagines. The intensity of 2026 is not chaos, it's precision. It doesn't overwhelm you with possibility, it focuses you into truth. It asks fewer questions and tolerates fewer compromises. And for those who are attuned to it, this feels less like pressure and more like permission. Permission to let go of what you've been maintaining out of habit. Permission to choose more cleanly. Permission to trust that what is falling away is not being taken from you, but released because it cannot cross the threshold with you. And perhaps the most important thing to understand is this: you are not approaching this gateway unprepared. The discomfort, the detachment, the quiet recalibration you've already experienced, that is the preparation. The threshold does not arrive to test you, it arrives because you are ready to meet it. And this is where the timing of this moment begins to make sense, because there is a reason this message could only reach you now. Not earlier, not later, not when you were still busy becoming who you thought you needed to be. There is a common illusion that messages like this arrive by chance, that you simply stumbled into the right words at the right time. But what's actually happening is subtler and far more intimate. Your awareness has reached a point of coherence where it can finally register what has been moving toward it all along. Before this moment, the signal would have passed straight through you, unnoticed, unreadable, like a language you hadn't learned yet. If you look back honestly, you'll see it. There were versions of this truth that brushed past your life before, ideas, conversations, even feelings, but they didn't land. They sounded interesting, maybe even intriguing, but not personal. They belonged to someone else's journey. Now they feel different. Now they feel addressed. That shift doesn't happen because the message changed. It happens because you did. Perception is not passive, it's earned through readiness. And readiness is not something you decide, it's something you become. This is one of the least understood aspects of awakening. You cannot force timing, and you cannot miss what is meant for you. Consciousness opens in layers, and each layer reveals only what you can integrate without distortion. If this message had arrived earlier, you might have tried to turn it into a goal, a belief system, something to chase or perform. But now, it arrives without urgency to prove anything. It simply resonates. And resonance is the clearest sign that an internal threshold has already been crossed. What's happening here is not learning in the traditional sense. You are not being filled with new information. You are recognizing a pattern you already carry. That quiet sense of familiarity, the feeling that you've heard this before without ever hearing it, that's memory, not memory of events, but memory of self. This is why the message feels less like instruction and more like permission. Permission to trust what you've been sensing but couldn't quite articulate. Permission to stop second-guessing the subtle intelligence that has been guiding you beneath the surface. There is also a reason this message reached you amid transition, not stability. Quantum awareness doesn't break through when life feels neatly resolved. It arrives in the in-between, when identities are loosening and certainty is unavailable. That liminal state creates permeability. You are less defended, less invested in maintaining a fixed story about who you are. In that openness, recognition becomes possible. This is not coincidence, it's design. The message arrives when it can be received, without being hijacked by the ego's need to control it. You might notice that nothing here is asking you to believe anything blindly. There is no demand for faith, only an invitation to notice. Notice how your body responds. Notice the quiet settling that happens when something aligns. Truth does not shout, it stabilizes. It feels like something clicking into place rather than something being added. And that is how you know this moment is not about persuasion. It's about activation. Activation doesn't mean sudden change. It means availability. From this point forward, your awareness is slightly tuned differently. You will begin to notice patterns you once ignored, choices that carry more weight, moments that feel charged with significance. Not because the world has become magical overnight, but because you are now able to perceive the currents that were always there. This is the consequence of timing done right. So if you find yourself wondering why this video, why now, the answer is simple and profound. This is the moment when your inner landscape became compatible with the message, not because you searched harder, but because you softened enough to receive it. You didn't summon this awareness through effort. You made space for it through becoming. And once that space exists, what is meant to find you always does. As this awareness settles in, another experience often rises to the surface, one that can feel unsettling if you don't understand its role in the process. It's the sense that who you thought you were is becoming unstable. Labels you once used comfortably start to feel inaccurate. Roles you've played for years lose their gravity. Even your emotional reactions may surprise you. Things that once triggered you no longer do, while small moments suddenly feel charged. This can feel like fragmentation, like something essential is slipping away, but what's actually happening is not a loss of self. It's a loosening of the scaffolding that once held that self in place. Identity is not who you are, it's who you learn to be in order to survive, belong, or make sense of the world at a certain level of awareness. And every identity has an expiration point. When consciousness outgrows it, the structure begins to crack, not violently, but persistently. You may notice yourself questioning motivations you never questioned before, or feeling resistance toward obligations you once fulfilled automatically. This isn't rebellion, it's honesty surfacing where compliance used to live. The reason this stage feels disorienting is because identity gives the illusion of solidity. It tells you where you stand, how to behave, what to expect from yourself. When it starts to dissolve, the mind panics. because it equates structure with safety. But the deeper intelligence within you understands something the mind does not. You cannot carry an outdated self-image into a new timeline. The frequency won't match. The collapse is not a failure of stability, it's an upgrade of capacity. This is where many people try to rebuild too quickly. They rush to define themselves again, adopting new labels, new missions, new explanations, just to regain a sense of footing. But premature certainty blocks integration. The space between identities is not a void to escape, it's an incubation chamber. It's where the next configuration of you is forming, free from the reflexes of the past. Sitting in this space requires trust, not in outcomes, but in the intelligence of the process itself. You may also feel a strange detachment from outcomes during this phase. Success and failure don't hit the same way they used to. Praise feels lighter, criticism less personal. This can be misinterpreted as numbness, but it's actually perspective. When identity loosens, experience is no longer filtered through constant self-reference. You begin to witness your life rather than defend it. And in that witnessing, a deeper authority emerges, one that doesn't need validation to exist. Paradoxically, this unmooring is what allows true alignment to occur. As long as you are tightly identified with who you think you are, your choices are constrained by that image. But when the image softens, movement becomes possible. You start responding instead of reacting. You choose based on resonance rather than obligation. This is not a collapse into chaos, it's a return to flexibility. Identity was never meant to be rigid, it was meant to be provisional. There may be moments when you grieve this shedding, even if you don't know exactly what you're grieving. That's natural. You're releasing versions of yourself that kept you safe, connected, functional. Gratitude and grief can coexist here. You don't have to reject who you were to become who you are becoming. The past self isn't being erased, it's being integrated. And slowly, without effort, something steadier begins to take its place. Not a new persona, but a presence. A sense of being anchored internally rather than defined externally. You may find that you trust yourself more, even while knowing less. That uncertainty doesn't frighten you as much, because you're no longer relying on a fixed identity to navigate it. This is the activation hidden inside the collapse. When the false center dissolves, the true center reveals itself, not as a concept, but as a felt sense of coherence that doesn't depend on who you think you are. This is why identity fragmentation is not a detour on the path to a quantum shift. It is the path. It is the clearing that makes resonance possible. And though it may feel like you're coming apart, what's really happening is far more precise. You are being reassembled around truth instead of habit. As that deeper center begins to stabilize, something else becomes clear in a way that can feel both relieving and confronting at the same time. You start to notice that the shift you've been sensing cannot be chased. It doesn't respond to effort in the way you were taught to believe growth does. There is no finish line you can run toward, no checklist that guarantees arrival. The more you try to make the quantum shift happen, the more it seems to recede, not because you're doing something wrong, but because striving belongs to the very identity that is dissolving. This is where many people get stuck, exhausting themselves by applying old methods to a new field. They try to think the right thoughts, say the right words, hold the right vision, hoping reality will eventually comply. But the field you are entering doesn't respond to performance. It responds to coherence. It listens not to what you want, but to what you are. And what you are is communicated continuously through your nervous system, your emotional baseline, your self-concept, not through bursts of intention layered over inner contradiction. You may begin to notice that when you are calm, clear, and honest with yourself, things align without effort. Opportunities appear. Conversations open doors. Insights arrive unannounced. And when you are internally fragmented, forcing outcomes only creates friction. This isn't punishment, it's feedback. Reality is mirroring your state with increasing accuracy because the lag time between inner alignment and outer response is shortening. This is one of the defining characteristics of a quantum shift. The universe becomes less tolerant of self-betrayal. Matching the shift does not mean becoming passive or detached from desire. It means allowing desire to reorganize itself around truth. Some wants will fall away because they were compensations, not callings. Others will deepen, becoming quieter but more insistent. You may find yourself drawn to simplicity, to fewer commitments, to environments that support clarity rather than stimulation. This isn't withdrawal from life, it's refinement of signal. When the noise lowers, the field can hear you. There is a subtle but crucial difference between intention and embodiment. Intention is directional, embodiment is gravitational. Intention says, I want to be this. Embodiment says, this is where I'm standing. The quantum field responds to where you stand. When your values, boundaries, and self-respect align, reality adjusts around that position. You don't need to demand alignment from the world, you need to maintain it within yourself. The rest follows naturally. This is why rest, presence, and discernment become surprisingly powerful during this phase, not as luxuries but as technologies. When you stop scattering your energy, coherence increases. When coherence increases, influence expands. You may find that doing less produces more, not immediately, but unmistakably. This can challenge deeply ingrained beliefs about worth and productivity. But the shift you're entering is not built on proving your value, it's built on recognizing it. You might also notice a new intolerance for forcing connections, outcomes, or timelines. What once felt necessary now feels draining. Your system knows when something requires too much effort to sustain. This isn't laziness, it's intelligence. When you are aligned, movement feels supported. When you are not, resistance shows up quickly, not to block you, but to redirect you. Matching the shift is ultimately an act of trust, not in external guarantees, but in internal feedback. It's choosing to listen to the quiet yes and no within you, even when it contradicts expectations. It's allowing your pace to slow enough for precision to emerge. You are not here to chase a future version of yourself. You are here to stabilize into the present version that can hold it. And when that stabilization happens, the shift doesn't arrive with fireworks, it arrives with normalcy that feels strangely right. Life begins to meet you where you are because for the first time, you are actually there. And now, almost without you realizing it, you arrive at the quiet recognition that brings everything together. Not a dramatic conclusion, not a final revelation that demands applause, but a subtle knowing that settles into your body like truth does when it no longer needs to be explained. You notice that while many people may hear these words, not everyone will feel them. Some will brush past them without friction, without pause. But you didn't. Something in you slowed down. Something listened. That response is not accidental, and it isn't something you need to justify. It's the final confirmation, not from me, but from your own awareness. Recognition always precedes transformation. Before anything visibly changes, there is a moment where you realize you are already inside the process. That's what this is. You are not standing at the edge of the quantum shift, wondering if you'll be chosen. You're noticing that you've been participating in it for some time now, quietly, internally, without labels or fanfare. The shift didn't begin when you understood it. It began when your choices started to change without you forcing them, when your tolerance for misalignment decreased, when honesty became more important than comfort. This is where many people look for a sign, some external confirmation that they're on the right path. But the nature of this shift is such that the confirmation is internal first. It arrives as coherence, as a sense of rightness that doesn't depend on outcomes. You may not know where everything is going, but you trust the direction you're facing. That trust is not naive, it's earned. It's the result of listening to yourself through confusion, through identity loss, through uncertainty, and discovering that something steady remained. What's important to understand now is that nothing about this process requires urgency or pressure. The recognition itself is enough to keep the movement alive. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Your awareness has already recalibrated, and from here forward, you'll notice how life begins to respond differently. Not necessarily easier, but clearer. Misaligned paths will close faster. Aligned ones will open with less resistance. This is not because the world has changed overnight. but because your signal has stabilized. And here is the paradox: the moment you stop trying to make the shift happen is the moment you fully enter it. The moment you allow yourself to be exactly where you are, without needing to rush, prove, or explain, is the moment the field meets you there. The future you've been sensing doesn't arrive as a sudden leap. It unfolds as a series of present moment alignments that feel quietly inevitable. So consider this your invitation, not to do more, but to stay present with what you already feel. Let this recognition deepen rather than harden into belief. Let curiosity replace certainty. Let listening become your primary action. Over the coming days and weeks, notice what pulls you and what drains you. Notice where your energy expands and where it contracts. These signals are not random, they are instructions. If this message resonated, don't rush past it. Stay with it, sit with it. And if you feel called to continue this journey, to explore these shifts more deeply, and stay attuned as 2026 approaches, I invite you to subscribe and remain here. Not because you need guidance, but because resonance grows in shared awareness. And if something in you feels ready to engage, leave a comment, even a single word, not for me, but as a marker to yourself that you recognize this moment.